Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Shreya, your host and program manager at the Takshashila Institution. And for today's discussion, I'm joined by my colleague and fellow program manager, Leah. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Shreya. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Govias. I'm also an assistant program manager at the Takshashila Institution in the Policy School. Thanks for having me, Shreya.
It's so great to have you, Leah. I feel like we've been having on and off this conversation over the last couple of days about domestic workers, and we've been sharing anecdotes. And I just remembered that almost so many women, right? At least I personally know, are terrified of losing their maid or domestic helper. And that's a topic that we're going to talk about today, which is the future of work for domestic workers in India, right? They cook, they clean, and they care for our homes, but often their own working conditions remain precarious and invisible, with estimates ranging from 4 million to over 50 million domestic workers. They are an essential but undervalued part of India's economy. And often the conversation is about formal versus informal sector, and the debate sort of goes in that direction. But I think the real question we can ask, at least for today's podcast, is how do we create an environment where they can truly thrive, prosper through their engagements and employment? So, from wage anchoring to time off, legal protection to social mobility, what does the future of work look like for them? And over the next half hour or so, that's what we hope to explore. So, Leah, what I find really I think ironic about this conversation is that in spite of common knowledge that domestic workers don't have the best deal they can get, there are a lot of structural issues in their employment, employability, access, safety, all of that. It's still the case that so many people in urban India and cities around us are extremely dependent on the service they do for us, and are terrified about the fact that if your domestic helper leaves, what do you do? And I wonder, at least a part of me wonders, if it's because somewhere you also realize that it's not a great deal. It's totally imaginable for them to up and leave one day. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about this further, and I thought maybe there's 3 roadblocks we could explore for today, which are around competition, safety, and time off.
Yes.
We've discussed this, right? Competition is just one of the main issues. I think that tie into all of the other points as well, which is a domestic worker who maybe works in 3 houses and is thinking of taking on a 4th um, uh, area of employment, is anchored by that wage. They can't go 3x or 4x on their existing wage, and that's such a huge deterrent to growth and to opportunity for them. Do
Yeah.
you see that in your interactions with this space?
Yeah, totally. And like you were talking about how it's largely unstructured when talking about wages and things. Um, we don't often see um, an increase in salary incrementally, like every year after, in the way that most corporates or organizations might work. So
Yeah.
they often get the same wage throughout their employment at a single home, and with very few days off, maybe with exceptions of 1 or 2 holidays. Most of them work even on Sundays, so no days off in the week. And even though they know those employing them are very dependent on them, it's difficult to negotiate for higher salaries. So,
I know that's so strange, right? You'd think the fact that there is this dependency, it would motivate someone to ask for what they think they're worth. Yeah, absolutely. Their negotiation capacity becomes really tough, and I think that's also why, right? Like, unlike a workspace or an office space, a home is a very private space that this domestic worker gets to inhabit for some time every day. Um, from the looks of it, it doesn't seem like a place where you have a lot of negotiation power. It's obviously someone else's space that you get to just go visit, finish that service, and come back.
yeah,
I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that while their services are highly required, there is absolutely no negotiation that takes place. Oftentimes, for years on end, there is no raise that these workers have access to, and so it looks like there's also no real value for any skill improvement on their part, right? Like, what's the point of
yeah, yeah,
getting better at what you do or increasing your productivity if there's no monetary value that you can gain from it, or time saved, or some sort of resource that you can
yeah,
access.
yeah. That's
And
true. That's true.
yeah, and this reminds me of also another offhand comment that a lot of people's, or at least even a belief that people have in that domestic workers need a lot of supervision. They need to be told what to do. They're not very motivated on their own. You have to manage them. And I wonder if at least some of this could be because of the fact that there isn't a lot of scope for a higher wage based on an increased effort.
But I also think that there's an argument to be made where a lot of them who come to work in these homes are maybe they're women with young children who are trying to earn a wage so that their children can do better than being domestic workers because they've seen the kind of lifestyles that I mean, like the homes that they clean or cook in, right? And they want the same for their own children. So I think it's more about just getting work done for some, for just getting the work done and getting that wage to work towards their children becoming that elevated in society, and less about the actual work that they do. So I think that's where the argument about supervision might come from as well,
Hmm.
where because they're
I see.
unmotivated to actually do the work and they've seen a better lifestyle. It's less about wanting to do the work.
I see. Right. In that I'm only doing this because I'm forced to do this, and this is,
Yeah,
just one way. I see. I
yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's also the case in some instances, I feel. I wonder if it's a mix of both. Like, I wonder if, yes, I'm also doing this because this is all I could do with the level of education I have access to. But also that even if I'm good at my job, there is not going to be a raise coming my way. I can't 4x, 5x my income. And the only
Yes,
option is to do more homes, and I'm already really tired. I wonder if that's the current issue. Anyway, just
yes, yes, that's true.
no, I think so. On the topic of competition, another issue, at least in a lot of apartment complexes in urban cities, is that to curb this a wage increase by domestic workers and maids, the committee decided by the residents of the complex sort of put a price cap or a wage cap on what maids can be paid. So they'll say, X for X and Y service or something like that. And so you can't, if you're working in that apartment complex, you can't charge more than that. And the idea, I'm presuming, is to ensure a fair system where no one gets cheated, meaning residents. But this is some of the biggest high rises and prime real estate in most of these cities. I'm hard pressed to find an argument where they need a wage cap to pay their domestic workers. But this is still something that has a lot of following for and a lot of agreement for,
Yeah.
and it's also something that is a huge challenge for a domestic worker, right? An arbitrary number that's decided by a committee, and that's all you're going to get. You can't, like, no amount. You could be an exceptional at your job, but that's not going to really materialize in any way, and that's a huge challenge, I think.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And I think also by you completely eliminate any chance. I think the point of view from the society also is that when they set a price cap, is that it allows, if the maid wants to or the domestic worker wants to earn more, they can work in more houses in that society.
That's true.
Um, so rather than getting a higher salary from different people, they just work in more houses and get the same salary in each house and increase their salary that way by doing more work, basically.
That's
And
true.
that also, again, like we were talking about some time ago in our discussions, that could have adverse effects on their health as well, and how much time they can make a day for the other things that they have going on. I mean, and there's also, with the current system, there's also the freedom for them to kind of choose how they manage their day,
Exactly.
how much time they can spend working. So if they are able to work in a place where they get a higher salary, or there's opportunity to get higher, like for their salary to be increased over time, then there's even a routine that can set in, right? Where and they're more likely to stay in a single place of employment for a longer time rather than leave their employment after a couple of years and search for a better salary as well.
Exactly. It's what they're basically saying is you can't go higher. You can only go wider. So you can keep
Right.
increasing quantity of the spaces you work in. You can't really maybe move to a higher level of productivity in that same space, or transition from like a level 1 or level 2 of work to a level 3 or 4 in that exact location. So it's quite disheartening in that sense. And like you said, I totally agree about the health ramifications of having to work in multiple locations at a fixed price, um, just to make ends meet. And same with scheduling, right? That means your days are pretty regimented. You have to do XYZ in that order to meet all of your commitments. You can't take a call on moving your schedule, and that seems to be the case for a lot of domestic workers. They come in the morning and they go later in the evening. And but a lot of people, I think, call that efficiency, in that they're here for 15-20 minutes a day. That's all the work there is to do. And somehow I think they imply it to mean that there is very little work to do, and just 15 minutes of work per day, somehow kind of minimizing it, I feel, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not taking into stock that this is all you're also allowing them to do. Somewhere the structures are such that they can't progress to a higher. It could totally be the case that they move on to, maybe if they were, say, doing cleaning at a home, they move on to then cooking in that place, and someone else can come in and do cleaning. Or they can do elder care or child care, and someone else can cook and clean as well. So it's not like there is any progression in skill level. It's just do more homes. And that's also somewhere rationalized, saying they only do a little bit of work every day. It's not a lot. um, you know
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. That's a good point.
so I feel like it's a real sort of at multiple levels, it's a very double bind kind of situation for domestic workers. And I mean, I wonder about it from time to time, at least from my interactions with the homeowners, and you know some domestic workers that I do meet or I'm friends with from time to time. Their bargaining power is just really reduced to nothing. And I wonder if there are other interventions that can help with this. Like there are new employment models, like platform based or subscription based, like gig work models, that one do help with ensuring a better deal or a better wage for a particular service, even though just being part of that platform or product comes with its own set of issues and red tape. That goes without saying. But just in terms of the wage you can get, it's possible that you can get a higher wage when there is another party negotiating on your behalf.
Yes, yes. And I do think there's a legitimacy that sets in when you know you're hiring from an organization or an agency. So some people might even be willing to pay the set price because it's set that way. If you're negotiating with an individual, I think it's easier to bargain to a lower price. But if it's coming from an agency, there's more legitimacy that way, and people are more likely to spend more money. And I think that this is true with companies like Urban Clap, where they have various services and they've set the price there, and there's no negotiating power that you might have on the application. So they're getting multiple roles in a day, multiple jobs in a day with a set at a decent price that's agreeable to them, and it's set beforehand. If you want more expertise also, I think the app has experts, so they are at maybe 200 or 300 rupees extra, and their wages set there on the app that way. So I think that is another system that has worked as far as I've seen.
Yeah, I totally agree. There is the benefits of collective bargaining that you have access to just because you're part of a bigger pool of other applicants and service providers. I also wanted to bring up that in a lot of other countries, like colluding to fix wages for a service is punishable. I don't think that's the case here. And so I think that's why a lot of apartment complexes get away with things like this. There isn't enough that's done on that um, line. But I think this is also an important seg to talk about safety in domestic work. Oftentimes, when you don't have a lot of options, it can be that you take up employment based on what you have access to, um, sometimes compromising on safety. And so, safety remains one of the most pressing concerns for domestic workers, especially for underage and full time live in help. I was just looking up at some numbers, and over 12.6 million domestic workers in India are under 18 years old, with 86% of them being girls. And even more alarming, one in four of these child workers are below the age of 14. And beyond the legal violations of child labor laws, many domestic workers, both children and adults, face unsafe working conditions, exploitation, and even in extreme cases, physical and sexual abuse. There have been a
Yeah.
lot of news articles that have come up in the last year at least that document some of these. In many cases, these individuals have had to be rescued from their place of employment. Oftentimes, it is full time work. And
Yes. Yeah.
and it's just, I think, also adds to the private and very invisible nature of the kind of work that a lot of domestic workers go through every day. It's not even like an office where many people have eyes on the goings on. And so, in response, I was reading up more about it. And in response, in at least September 2024, labor departments in the capital city have directed resident welfare associations, RWAs, to take responsibility for sensitizing residents against employing minors. And they put the onus on these associations to keep a continued watch on residents and the kind of domestic workers that come and either work with them part-time or stay there full-time, to keep a watchful eye on that. This of course
Yeah.
seems like
I've
a temporary solution to like a
yeah.
serious issue.
I've also observed though that so in a lot of these families, especially in urban cities, you have families that come from villages who move to these cities for employment. And but there's also the expectation that, I mean, there's one that the girls, I mean, they don't go to school anymore, even though education is free. They're
Right.
asked not to go to school anymore. They're expected to earn for the family, and then they're married off, still quite young. Maybe, I mean, some even child marriages, and then they're expected to earn for the family now, the new family now, like their in-laws, their own family, and with their husband as well, facing abuse of from their in-laws as well. So
Right.
yes, even sensitizing might not. I mean, this thing is happening from the other side as well, where they're forced to work in order to earn money for their new families
Yeah.
that they marry into.
Is this an explicit requirement that is that they've been told?
Yeah, it does end up being an explicit requirement because, like, if they don't have their children yet, then and they don't have much money as well, so they seek
Right.
employment in homes.
Right.
Um, which also allows them, because again, the timings are flexible. You can choose how many jobs you want to do in a day. So it also leaves you time to come back home and cook for the family and then go back and do some work. And
Right.
then come back home in the evening in time for your spouse to come back and cook for them.
Right. I have also heard of another version of this, which is a lot of domestic workers sort of downplay the amount of time they're away from home,
Yeah.
saying things like, I'm of course paraphrasing here, saying things like, there's not much for me to do at home, or everyone's out, my kids are out, my husband's out, we live in a very small place, it doesn't have so much space like, like the kind of places I work in. But I wonder if oftentimes it's just their living situations could be a bit disturbed. There could be a lot going on. And for many, working is also a way to, I think, one, improve their situation. Uh, or there is an explicit or kind of understood requirement for them to contribute to improving their family situation,
Yes. Yes.
because it seems like none of them really want to stay at home and rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe they think that's not an option at all, because that's literally never talked about. I haven't heard any domestic. I mean, not that I've spoken to many, but it's just, if you're not working in one place, you're working in another place, and that's also really interesting in terms of like time off, right? I've spoken to a few people asking about the kind of, how the week looks like for the person who works at their homes, and it's
Home.
almost often one day off, so it's Sunday off. And when I've asked about why they don't get 2 days off in a week, I mean, just to explore that conversation, I've gotten responses like they get one day off a week, but if they're sick, then they're off many days, and so then that evens out, or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very unstructured. It's there's nothing written. I mean, not that drastically changes things, but there's no understanding per se. It looks like if this person's working in 4 5 houses, there's going to be, I'm sure, 4 5 different ways of doing things. And each employer might have a different idea of what's okay, what's not okay. But so the idea is that you don't get weekly off, and when you're sick, you take a lot of days off, and so that somewhere makes that okay. And that got me thinking about just the kind of time off that these domestic workers, oftentimes women, have access to, right? I don't think 2 days a week is a norm for any of them, unless, of course, you're coming through a professional agency that has a rotational service offering where, if one person's not coming, they have another domestic worker on shift who can come and service that apartment complex or so. But national or festival holidays also, I think, are very grudgingly given. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just that with this whole work from home culture that's like reshaping how we think about flexibility, rest, and work boundaries and all of that, you know, the kind of holidays that domestic workers get sounds very ancient and stuck in a very old time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There hasn't been, I don't think there has been a lot of change that has happened for many years with respect to, I mean, I think there have been like labor laws and things that have been drafted but never put into effect over many years.
Yeah, there's about 6 or 7 labor laws that are meant for protecting domestic workers and their rights. There is the
Yeah,
Organized Workers Social Security Act 2008, the Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act. Of course, that is a larger law, but all of these laws are very fragmented. None that, completely solve for the rights and issues and protection of domestic workers. And
yeah,
there is a national policy on domestic workers that is in the works, but of course that is also some time away. But I was also thinking about the social norm shifting that's involved in an issue like this, right? That's exactly what you're saying, in that nothing has changed for so many years. And so how do you get things to change, right? Even just one individual resident deciding to give an extra day off to their domestic worker is also, actually, to them sounds ridiculous, because then the argument is that person's still going to show up and do this 4 or 5 other homes in my apartment complex, and I'm the only one who's going to have to, I think, pay the price of giving them that extra holiday. So it
right.
looks like the few people who are empathetic to this situation are outliers, in that the majority is still going to be expecting this kind of 6-day week, no holidays, unless you're absolutely sick, or you have to go somewhere, like like your daughter's getting married or something like that, in which case, sure, don't show up to work. But every other day you're expected to show up to work, and
Yeah,
it's kind of really sad. And finally, I thought there's also the whole spatial segregation of domestic workers, right? There's a lot that's been written about this, in that a lot of these spaces that these workers are in, they're required to clean and manage them, for example, like gardens and parks, but they're not allowed to inhabit those spaces.
yeah,
Between the 5-6 places you're working in, you can't go sit on a bench in the park and just rest and relax. If you're a domestic worker, there's a
yeah.
larger
You're
question.
always on the move. You're
You're
always
always,
on the move.
and
Yeah,
oftentimes you're censored by people like yourself and people who are different from you. It's not even like there is an oppressor all the time. A lot of the times, people like you doing similar kind of work as you also will be like, why are you sitting there? That's not for us to be sitting on. I wonder if that's the case. And this also raises a larger question about caste, class, gender in domestic work, especially in such a diverse place like India. And it looks like, over and above the kind of topics we've spoken about, like competition and safety, which are universal in a free market, there's also the more deeper topics of inequality that are still there to solve.
yeah, that's true.
And I'm so glad we got to have this conversation, because I find myself having these fleeting thoughts from time to time. But just deciding to do this discussion has gotten me to put some of these thoughts down and just understand them fully.
Yeah, yeah. And it also makes me wonder how come we have not had anything enforced yet with regards to some kind of structure or rights for domestic workers. Um, Considering we have such a massive population of people in our country who do this kind of work, and I'm sure that even though we might have government data on the number, I'm sure it's double that because a lot of them don't actually register themselves as domestic workers.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a huge population that struggle with, I mean, with difficult working conditions, often abuse in the homes that they work in, and have trouble negotiating their pay as well, pay,
Yeah.
time off, and taking care of themselves.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag. And like you said, they're also really diverse, right? Just thinking about the scale of this, there's so many different kinds of arrangements I'm sure that domestic workers have in different parts of the country, in different cities, with employers based on their unique situations. Like some, like you said, have children, or some have older family members, or some live close by or far away. And I wonder if that's also the issue in bringing a more formal structure to this conversation. But just making domestic work as part of the formal sector is also not like a solution in itself, because that brings with it its own challenges of there are a lot of restrictions that go into stipulations rather that go into how formal work is measured, and so that will apply to domestic work as well, and that can bring its own challenges. So there is a lot of freedom that will be foregone. A lot of freedom, I mean, the freedom that they do have, the little freedom that they do have in kind of choosing their employer, choosing their work hours, all of that will be gone for the benefits of formal work that's promised. So that's also a risk that's there in formalizing the whole sector. And I guess that's also why it's taking so much time. I wonder in that how do you formalize such a large sector, and how do you ensure that this is ultimately going to benefit them and not be more of a challenge than the kind of challenges they're already facing today.
Yeah, I think that way having, again, them being a part of organizations or agencies, um, I think that way, you'd be monitoring. I mean, the agencies can monitor where they've worked at certain hours, how long they've worked there. The price is set for their salaries, and there is an opportunity for them to increase their wages as well incrementally. I think there could be an opportunity there.
Yes, Leah, I totally agree. That's my bet too, in that these kinds of service providers and a new innovative business model, I think, could help this situation from deteriorating further until there's something solid that can help them
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
systemic way.
definitely.
Thank you, Leah. This has been such a interesting conversation for me. I find myself thinking about these kinds of topics, and I'm so glad I get to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for having me. This is definitely an eye-opening conversation, and I hope a lot of people listening to this have some takeaways from it as well, and contribute to the conversation as well.
Thank you, listeners. We hope this was useful for you. If you have thoughts, please write in to contact@takshashila.org.in, and we'll see you in a future episode.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.